I can't believe I'm even hearing this right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. I'm your host, Jeff, and with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Mona and Alan. We are post-evangelical ministers and theological thinkers grappling with our place in the progressive Christian world. Thank you for joining us for another conversation on faith and culture. This week, it being election day, we are going to talk about fatalism and what you do when you feel like there's no hope in the world and the things you do don't matter. And for our segment, we're going to be doing something called biblical elections. So the reason that we're going to have this particular topic is we were deciding what we were going to record and what direction we were going to go. And we kind of all realized, man, what are we doing? And we found out that we were all on the same page, and we figured, you know what? Instead of wallowing in it, let's turn it into an episode.
Harnessing all of that downward spiral energy. Well, I brought this episode up. I think I was the first one to suggest it because I've been feeling quite down lately. I've been feeling like, I think the word is, Alan, you use the word compassion or empathy fatigue. Yeah. I use the word activist or justice fatigue. And I think it's the idea that a lot of us spend a lot of our lives not just feeling compassion for the world, but trying to do things to make the world better. And what happens when you get to a place when you feel like your efforts don't really matter or make a difference? I mean, they do, and they change us, right? But at a point, it gets really exhausting caring all the time. And so what do you do with that? And how do we even think about that theologically?
Yeah. And what does it mean statistically when your vote doesn't count and your efforts don't count and there's no measurable change to what you do?
I was thinking today about the election and how so many of my friends have commented lately, and I've been seeing this all over the news, that so many people feel really down and really frustrated this election season with the given candidates. There are very few people who are like truly partisan when it comes to the election. And so a lot of us have felt like we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. And we're in a political moment where just everything seems broken all the time. You know, our racial system, our justice system, our economic system, our education system, environment, everything is just freaking broken, you know? And so I mean, we don't want to bum anybody out with this episode, but probably you're listening if you resonate with this a little bit. And I was thinking about how amazing it is that even in the sense of chaos that I have and so many people have right now, at the end of the day, we can still trust that hopefully our system will march forward. We don't have to fear military coups, at least here in the U.S. context. We don't have to fear, democracy completely falling apart. I mean, even if the candidate you don't want gets elected, like our system will still march forward for better or for worse. And we have a modicum of stability that I think we take for granted because we've known it for so long, and most of us have known it our whole lives here. And so I think that it's easy to feel fatalistic and forget the things that we can be thankful for despite the chaos that we sense. It's actually not real chaos. It's the perception.
There's some truth to that. Because we're so oppositional in politics and in our culture, we're given to extremes that we tend to paint things the way we think that will get people to react and act. And so candidates are worse than they probably are. And in some cases, and others maybe not. I don't know. I personally, as a co-host of this podcast, feel like kind of punting to the whole, the United States is going to be kind of the way that it always has been, and there's some safety in the state, actually really bothers me because I empathize a lot with the countries that we invade and bomb and the people that we drone strike and the communities that the state itself kind of lives off of and oppresses. And so when I hear the machine is going to be like kind of as how it's been and it's going to be a peaceful transfer, the idea of like peace in that sense is kind of like a Pax Romana to me. And that's probably fatalistic, and maybe I should be thankful for what I have, but it's hard to feel #blessed when, your stability is dependent upon the suffering of so many different people around the world. And I don't know. disruption feels like progress. And maybe I'll get arrested for saying that someday if certain people have their way. You're saying something that's very true for me as a podcaster and a minister and somebody who feels compassion, is that like at some point you give and give and give, and you care so much to the point where it just gets hard. You know, there are days where I take off like caring about the whole world. Like I don't want to care about one person today or something. And today was one of those days. I was feeling that before we even got on. And I don't know what to do with that. You know, instead of just like maybe just waiting it out is kind of what I usually do. I think this disproportionately affects people who are tapped into empathy. That's what I read online about compassion fatigue a couple years ago. You know how you like watch the videos of the dogs over and over with what's that song in the background? Who's that singer?
Sarah McLachlan.
Yeah, Sarah McLachlan. In the arms of an angel. And then the sad dogs are looking at you. And you see it over and over and over. And pretty soon you're like, okay, I don't want to look anymore. You know, I can't see another one. I don't care anymore because I've seen so many.
You know, when we talk about how we're going to deal with this, and Moni mentioned earlier, we don't mean to bum everyone out, but I thoroughly believe that this conversation will be our psalm, right? It's going to start out, what are we going to do? God, why have you forgotten us? And it's going to end with some kind of praise, you know, some kind of like, okay, here's at least a step that we can take in that right direction. And I think it's that balancing act, right? There's so many things that are put out in front of us. And if we're people who are conscious about the world around us, clearly that feels even more intention than it has been for a while. And then you add on top of that, well, what's happening in my own personal life? And am I having those same experiences in interpersonal relationships or my work or whatever? Then it's going to feel that way. So I think that part of it is time, letting that pass. But then part of it is the concept of Sabbath has been very helpful for me. The idea of, okay, I need a break. You know, we think in terms of work that we do, whether it's a podcast or working at a church or, you know, working in an office somewhere. And we think in terms of like vacation and stuff like that. But I think we need Sabbath for our mind, you know, mindless entertainment, places where it is what it is. And there's nothing more outside of that.
That goes along with the concept of self-care, right? Like taking moments and having your Sabbath. We talked about that in a previous episode. I cannot remember which one.
And we've talked, it's been peppered throughout our
there was one episode where we really talked about it.
I think it was our mindfulness episode.
Maybe mindfulness. I think it goes beyond that for me in some ways. Like there's a real reevaluation at some point for like, what am I pouring my energy into? Am I talking more than I'm doing? Is my slacktivism hurting me? You know, like all the little ways that I'm going to post on Facebook and do this and do that. Is it really causing any change? Like, am I pouring my energy into things that even matter? I think there is a reevaluation for what I do.
I think definitely. And I think another part of that too is that concept of casting your pearls before swine. Like, who are you directing your voice at? And maybe it's not so much the things that you're doing are pointless, but the people you're directing it at are.
You're directing at people who already agree with you, for instance,
or the opposite.
Yeah, that's right.
Or the opposite, where you're directing at people that you know that's not going to change their mind, and all you're doing is engaging in argument and fatigue. And it's just like, you know, I need to know who I can talk to and who I can't talk to.
I think for me, I think those are great points. And for me, Jeff, it's funny when you said Sabbath, I like cringed because I have.
You cringed at a biblical term, Mona? That doesn't sound like you.
You know me. It's not that that's a bad idea. It's that I have I've been noticing lately that I have a tremendous guilt complex for relaxing and for enjoying myself, given the amount of stuff I know about how crappy the world is and how much work needs to be done. And I was thinking recently about, you know, lineage of Protestantism and our work ethic here, that really we have this built into our psyche that we have to work for enjoyment. Otherwise, it's not earned. It's not holy. It's not grace-filled in some capacity. That's a cultural lineage that's very subtle, but that has been handed down from generation to generation. You know, there's a saying that there's no rest for the wicked, but I feel like there's also no rest for those who seek to be righteous, because the people who want to make the world best most, I feel like, often are haunted by that sense of calling. And at a point, it becomes not a sense of calling, but it becomes a burden that's too great to bear. So I don't know how to, for myself, let go in those times when I need to rest. So for me, it's like the words like Sabbath and self-care are getting there for me, like getting towards something, but they don't do it. They don't speak to the underlying guilt that I experience for enjoying my life, because I feel like other people don't have anything, and I can't enjoy the world as it is, knowing that there's such suffering out there.
That reminds me of something that's been in my head since you and I believe it's your friend talked about food insecurity, an episode in the past. And you just mentioned something about people with food stamps or programs that help them make ends meet and put food on their tables, and talking about like the whole concept of, oh, they're buying lobster and steaks and blah, blah, blah. Well, the concept of having a moment where someone who has nothing has a moment to like rest or actually experience enjoyment. And there's this sense of in our culture that's like, if you're not working hard, you should be suffering. You know, you only have the right to have a moment's rest if you've worked hard enough for it. And I think that's the opposite of what humanity is supposed to be about. Like, we are all entitled to rest, to just moments where you're not producing, you know, to be a field that's fallow and not constantly churning stuff out. And so the Protestant work ethic thing affects all kinds of stuff in our society.
So, well, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Like, I think I agree the idea of, first of all, I agree that the idea of like the work ethic, like the sense that if you work hard, then it's good work and it's more valid than anything else. I think there's a lot of flaws with that. Maybe that's a whole episode. But on the other end of that, Mona, you talking about, well, you know, how can I enjoy this? Isn't there an underlining assumption that to say that if you can't enjoy what's in front of you, that the underlying assumption is that anyone who's suffering don't have moments of happiness and rest? Do you know what I mean? Like, you feel guilt.
I think everyone certainly does. It's the whole idea. I think it's the question. If you really grapple with the idea of privilege, which I think we all try to, we recognize, like Alan said earlier, that our happiness actually comes at the direct or indirect expense of other people.
Right.
I know. What happiness are you specifically speaking of, though?
Our creature comforts are things that allow us to rest and relax and recreate.
Okay.
And our entire way of life here. I mean, if really, really thinking about it, the amount of resources that we consume and discard here means that other people go without.
True.
Like the average, I read recently that the average American consumes like 50 times as much as the average Indian, a person who lives in India. So it's just our regular life is such high consumption that it puts an undue burden on the planet and on future generations, on
so
current
maybe
ones.
It is sinful to enjoy that life if it's so out of whack with what the earth and the world's population is able to sustain. I mean, not just in an environmental sense, but in a macro sense, in a resource sense, in a I'm taking up more space than I ought to sense.
That's the
maybe that's getting off topic.
Angst.
No, I don't think it's off topic. I'm trying to get to the point of like, I agree with all that, and I think that we should be aware of that and conscious of that. I think it's flawed to assume that those two things, that and like rest and enjoying our time, are separate things. Like if someone who is on the other end of that spectrum, if we're talking about, we're on one end of the spectrum as far as privilege and what we have, and someone else is on the other end of the spectrum where they are the ones that are being the most taken advantage of by whatever system's in place, we still assume and know that those that people on that spectrum, that end of the spectrum, are still having moments of like life and connection, and it may not be their mode, but there may be escapes to that. And those places of escape, those places of rest, those places of relaxation don't have to be connected with the things that we have that make us privileged. Like, fine, if you don't, we don't want to relax and sit down and watch a movie that consumes all this stuff or whatever, but there's still just walking outside and being by ourselves. And I mean, I think that there's a way, I don't think that we need to always associate those two things, and that we can have those moments of peace and rest, even just interaction with people. Like, that's still happening in communities, and communities are bonding together and they're doing those things. And I don't think that one negates the other, if that makes any sense.
Well,
I don't know if I explained myself well.
It does. I mean, I'm thinking though of for example, my Black activist friends who say things like they don't have the luxury of escaping these issues because they wear the issues on their body. And that's just not the case for me, obviously, because I'm white, right? So I feel that if they don't get rest, then I shouldn't get rest. Like, and I think that's the core of an activist. It's like, I'm going to co-experience life with you to as much as I can so that we can make the situation better and more tenable, and so that you can find more sources of resilience, and not just sources of resilience, but we can actually change the systems that cause you to feel like you have to focus on being resilient in the first place, and you can just live your life. Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole conversation on rest, sure, but I think I'm trying to get at something much bigger than that.
You're feeling guilty as a byproduct of belonging to a society that causes oppression to support your comfort. I'm
not just feeling guilty, but I feel like that's not just my motivation though. It's my drive. Like, I'm not driven by guilt or something negative. I'm driven by like good things. I want good things for the world. But you can only sustain that drive for so long without feeling exhausted after a while, because you realize the longer you do this kind of work, actually, you see how small you are. You see how small you are in a sea of people, and how little power you actually have.
I know people who have given up, by the way. I know people who cared more than anyone else, and they're like, you know what? I can't do it anymore. They recognize that. And so they're like, I'm just not going to pursue that lifestyle. I'm not going to deal in activism. I'm not going to care. I'm just going to kind of do what makes me feel happy, and literally walk away from that kind of lifestyle because it was too much.
Yep.
Which makes it all the more important to find places. Like, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, right? That idea of burnout. Like, if there's so many people doing that and it's so easy to fall in that trap, what do we do to create enough space to give us moments to breathe, and moments to have hope, and moments to, and where does that come from? And I think it can come from a variety of different places, but I think at the same time, for as much as we're working to help others, we have to work to help ourselves on a certain level.
I watched a really interesting video recently about, it was a lesbian feminist talking about how she had chosen not to have children and how she got a lot of blowback from that. And she said, 20 years ago, lesbians were criticized for the ability of not being able to have kids. Sorry, let me start that over. About 20, 30 years ago, lesbians were heavily criticized because they chose to be lesbians. And this was before, IVF and some of the fertilization methods that they have now. They were criticized for not being able to have children because they were in the lesbian relationship. Nowadays, with the kinds of fertility methods that are out there, lesbians are criticized for being able to have children and choosing not to. That it's seen as a very selfish act culturally. But she said, actually, the biggest criticism that she's received in this video is that she doesn't care about future generations. And she said, actually, if you really stop and think about it, what more is caring about future generations than being a feminist activist and trying to make things better for future generations? And she says, I have so many friends who are so into the cause and doing all this great work, and then they decided to have families. Not that there's anything wrong with having families, but she said these particular friends just started caring about their own little insular unit and raising their kids and stopped caring about the rest of the world. And she said, I think that's the most selfish thing. So she said, it's
definitely a biological phenomenon, right? When you have children, your world gets smaller. Like, it happens to your brain. Mm-hmm.
It does. Yeah. And I mean, she's not trying to criticize having children, but she's trying to push back on what society sees as healthy and unhealthy and selfish and unselfish, which is a really interesting thing. So I think I'm kind of toying with that myself. Like, what kind of life do I want to lead? What kind of life do you guys want to lead? And this podcast is our effort to do something, right? At least to talk. If we can't do anything else, at least to talk and try to get other people involved in the conversation. That's a thing that we try to do. If nothing else,
Sometimes it's cathartic for me. Sometimes I do it just because it feels good to finally get a space to talk about stuff, not just to change anyone else, but just for me to process out loud what I'm kind of thinking and going through. That's what the podcast offers to me personally.
Yeah, I'm feeling that right now. Actually, I feel a little bit better. I've been worrying about this for a while.
To be honest, it's the only reason I do it. I'm not generous at heart whatsoever.
You're not?
I'm a cold-hearted, non-compassionate, selfish person. That's what I've been told before, that everybody is that, right?
Well, see, that's my problem with that whole thing. Like, right? Like you, because Mona, what you were talking about earlier, I 100% agree with. I think that, someone choosing not to have kids and devoting their life to activism, my only flaw with that is to use the words, isn't that more selfless than? That's where I think that the whole thing gets difficult and people feel like they get pushed out because, and I know this isn't what you were saying, but I think even those words, as someone who's had kids and have had conversations with other people about like why they don't have kids, it's easy to have that initial like feeling of being like not attacked, because that's a strong word, but that little irk in your heart, kind of like, well, that doesn't mean any one person is better than the other. They just chose different paths. One temporary with kids because they're going to grow up, and the other one like, this is my lifelong pursuit and I'm creating a better world. I think we need to stop looking at all those things as this is more selfish and this is less selfish, and say,
she didn't. I was paraphrasing badly.
I understand.
That's what I said. And of course, parenting takes a lot of work if you're going to do it right. Like, nobody's knocking. Like you're saying, like she was just trying to combat the really heavily weighted stereotype that really favors one camp and
exactly, and that highlights my point even more in that sense that. That's how she felt by the rhetoric of another side of that same argument, is that she felt like, well, no, I'm getting all this attack towards and blowback towards me. But a lot of it is that language that we use where we immediately compare and we're saying we're not doing enough. But if we burn out, we're not doing anything. So I think it's like maybe on one level, it's a trade-off. Do I allow myself to be a little selfish in this moment or this time in order to have more longevity, or do I just burn out and not do anything? And which is more like that? Then when we start asking which is more, I think that's part of the problem. I think it takes it narrows down our life to a simple binary. You're either doing something or you're not. And it can't be that simple. And if it is, then that's stressful. And no wonder we want to quit sometimes, because we all do that in moments in our head. Like we're all having this conversation because we're all in that moment, whether it's one of us feeling as though the world around us is just this chaotic and we can't do anything to fix it, or even if it's just in our own personal lives that we're dealing with those same things. Like, is my work important? Is my interaction with people important? And all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it seems like I have a hard time like remembering that my meaning is outside of what I do,
Yes. That's why I said existential. That's like an existential angst thing, is that existence itself is actually good. Outside of what you do, outside of what you create or change, like your existence as an organism, as life, which is super rare as far as we know in the universe, that's a special and good thing.
Man, I have a hard time remembering that.
Yeah, fully embracing that, I think, is kind of the core for me of feeling guilty when I'm not completely engaged in everything. Like just walking down the street, looking at the leaves, like Jeff was even saying, taking moments to just exist and be is like kind of like what we're here for. That's what we're fighting for, right? Is the existence of all people, of all life. And
it's the right for everyone to have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But things are so out of whack that's not the case. And, earlier in my life, I said I wanted to go into ministry, when I was in high school and stuff. And I think that's one of the primary reasons I haven't, because I got it in my head so deeply that you either give until you can't give anymore, or you're allowed to be selfish, but there's no in between. There's no like seasons where you're going to give more and then taking some breaks. And, there's not, I think a lot of times in ministry related or calling related or activist related vocations, people give so much of themselves without any boundaries or limitations. And that's so praised as a kind of martyrdom, but really it's not healthy. And people are painted in negative lights for drawing those boundaries when it's actually what you have to do in order to sustain this kind of work.
Yeah.
I have a retired minister in my congregation that I talk to all the time, and talking to him about boundaries and like clergy boundaries and training and things like that has just dramatically shifted in the last 50 years. Like even the concept of clergy boundaries really wasn't around. If you go back far enough, it was like your whole life was defined by who you were as this position, like in society, your home life, everything. And now you can read all kinds of articles where there's a big move toward better boundaries, better definitions, and preserving like private life and all kinds of things that are important.
Yeah, I mean, look at church structure, the advent of the parsonage, you know, a minister
I'm
living
talking from one right now.
on the, exactly, like that whole idea of that boundaryless, whatever, everything's, you know, nothing's off limits for someone in that position. And I think that there's a lot of similarity, you know, whatever word we use between someone who's in the ministry and someone who's doing activism is because they're putting themselves out there to be that. I know it's a little cliche to say, but it's kind of like if we don't have those moments of rest, like maybe part of that burnout is forgetting what we're fighting for in the first place. Like if we're trying to create space of peace and justice and hope for people, we have to at least create those spaces for ourselves to kind of spur us on to remember that it's still possible to have.
Not to just derail the conversation and like go back to something we previously touched on, but
you will anyway.
It just boggles my mind. It just boggles my mind. Did the woman, the video you watched, like, do people actually say that you're not having kids, so you're being selfish, or you're not contributing to the future? I've never heard that before. That's like a totally foreign concept to me.
Yeah, she said that was the criticism of lesbian communities. That, I mean, okay, so we have a very long history of patriarchy in Western thought and Eastern thought in the history of the world that measures women by the value of their ability to procreate and be nurturers. So if women step outside of that identity, they are a lot of people who are entrenched in patriarchal thought don't know what to do with them. They no longer have an identity. They no longer have a sense of worth. I mean, feminist theory suggests that that's why older women in the media get so maligned or seen or devalued, because they're past childbearing age and they're seen as less worthy, less of worth. So when lesbians in particular opt to have female partners over men or don't have any other choice because that's who they're attracted to, so they reject male partners and they choose not to have children, then their identity is to many people unfathomable and selfish and inherently wrong.
In church settings, I've seen young ladies who were like, you know what, I'm not going to have kids. I want to concentrate on my career, chastised for not obeying the call of God. Like I've seen it. I've listened to it.
Wow.
Fortunately, that's not one of the things I have to feel guilty about looking back on some of my ministry in more conservative settings. But
good job, Jeff.
Well, we could have a whole episode on things I feel guilty about regarding that. But that's very present, and I've seen it. I've seen it enough to where I can't say that it's been rare in my experience.
Man, it makes sense in the history. It makes sense in the history of the world to have that kind of perspective. Like you need to have kids to help out with the farm. You need to have kids to ensure against famine and drought and war and all those things that we're like facing against a world that's sparsely populated.
Yeah, but in feminist theory, like girls are not women until they childbear, and they're not adults until they childbear. So it's incredibly problematic that these ideas have lasted till today. And you can see it in this video that we're talking about, that there's a perception that if women opt not to participate in that system, if they don't do their duty, which is what we're talking about today, doing your duty and feeling guilty about not doing it, presumably, then they're either regarded as, inherently contrary to society or to the future, or as not women, or as inherently in the wrong, or not adults, or in some capacity. They're seen as othered. So to me, it almost feels the same way in activist circles. If you're not a militant activist to some of my friends, then you're not incorporated into the community or something. I don't know. Like, to what extent are we allowed to say to each other, hey, this is your duty, you ought to do it? And to what extent should we really take pause in regard to any of that. But I think there are some ways in which we do need to tell each other, like, this is your duty to humanity. Like, what are those things and what are those ways and how do we do that sustainably?
Or to ourselves. Like, how do we come to arrive at a decision that this is my duty? Like, I am called to this. Like, how do we even arrive at that?
Like, I do think we should be blasting to the populace that it is your duty to live in a climate conscious way because all of us are at stake. Like that should not be an option. I mean,
right.
I don't want to like infringe on people's personal freedoms, but at this day and age, with knowing what we know, that shouldn't be an option anymore. It should be considered basic human duty. So how do we use those social pressures for good, But also at the same time, knowing that it gets exhausting after a while to constantly care about these things and constantly act.
So then there's the other, you use the word like, I think you said like blasting or yelling or like putting our stuff out there. Like at what point do we stop and we be more measured in the way we approach things? Like the whole idea of just a basic argument, if you use certain terms or certain inflammatory remarks, or you just press the wrong button with the person that you're talking to, then you immediately, like physically, physiology, neurologically, you shut them down. And you can keep yelling, but all you're doing is creating a more and more of a divide. So I wonder if it's more of, part of it is stopping to reflect and being like, if I feel like I'm not making a difference, or I feel like nothing I'm doing is right, like really being more measured in the way that we protest, being more measured in the way that we try to enact change. Like one of the examples that they've used recently, and I know there's been some conflicting reports. I'll try to put all the stuff in the show notes for this, but they talked about how back here in California, back in the whole, was it Prop 8, the against gay marriage proposition that came in, the percentage at that time in the country was remarkably large, as far as the overwhelming majority of the country was still on a federal level against gay marriage. And then in the matter of like 8 years, I think it was, we are here where we are today, where it's legal.
Because of activists.
Exactly. But it wasn't but it was a specific type of activism. Like they've done studies and they talked about how, well, what changed that tide? It was a specific type of activism that was based off of one-on-one connection, telling people stories and connecting, as opposed to
in
really,
a very positive way.
Exactly. Protests or anything like that. So I wonder if some of it is, in all of our work, is self-imposed in the sense that we're so passionate, which is understandable, that we're reacting in such a way that we're almost countering what we want to happen instead of aiding it.
Ah, there it is. That's very well said.
Do you think that there's a place for hope? Mona mentioned
nope.
it. Mona mentioned like, well, it's nice to hope that that the bigger thing, that there are some things that are good, that are going to progress or change. And hopefully, you kind of said that, like, theologically speaking, it's very important to me in my work in ministry and activism and what I do to think about the fact that the world's bigger than me, like God, mountains, cities, the humankind, the universe. It's all a lot bigger than me. And feeling small it actually does the opposite for me. It doesn't burn me out thinking I have no way to make a change. It helps me realize that, like, I'm not responsible for the whole thing. I'm responsible for what I can do when I can do it, but I'm not responsible to turn the ship or to fix all the wrongs. There is a God outside of me, and there is a humanity outside of me that's bigger than who I am. And the hope I have is that God has given me a little bit, and I want to be faithful with what I have and what I know. And I have hope and trust that the small things that I do, I'm a part of a church that's, not huge. And a lot of the time I spend is working with individuals, and doing things that have very little impact on the whole. But I have hope that whatever I do, however small, contributes to God's vision for the world, and none of it's lost. It's not just because I didn't win or didn't have measurable success. I still have hope for everything that I do, that it's retained in the mind of God forever.
But don't you think that, wow, what a way to end on that. But don't you think that being comfortable and satiated with that small amount of hope, and I'm not saying anything you're doing is meaningless. I think it's really wonderful that you're in the ministry and that you're helping people and making their lives better. And that's awesome. But don't you think if everybody thinks that way and just kind of takes care of their small little corner, we don't have any dreamers to dream big and unite and lead us, and we don't have anyone going to the great depths of what it means to give your life over to a cause, the Martin Luther Kings and so forth. And I think that being satiated with that little corner of making a tiny piece of the world better can keep us from bigger and really important tasks that need to happen.
So maybe I misrepresented that. What I do is global in the small. Those huge ideas and those like that big vision and that connection to changing the world, I think is a part of the small piece that I have. Like, it's not that I'm not responsible for addressing the ship. I'm just not going to be the one to turn all of it, if that makes sense. I don't have to think that everything falls or stands based on my actions, but at the same time, I have access to all of that stuff. Like, it's not small. I don't know how to explain what I mean.
No, I think what you mean, or maybe what I hear you saying is that Martin Luther King Jr. still had an accountant, in the sense that we have a tendency to hero worship in culture because it's easier to tell that story and turn it into a movie or a book or something inspiring. But we forget that if we put all of our hope in that one person or that one figure, they are just one part, an important part of moving that forward, but there's still people behind the scenes that need to do the regular mundane work. Like,
they tried to do the boycott. He even got caught up into it because they wanted to organize a boycott of the buses and asked if they could do it at his church. And at first he wasn't sure whether or not he would let them or not. And
well, no, I'm not.
So there's other people.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying, is that there's other people that are doing work that isn't sexy, that isn't like on the front lines, that doesn't require a personality that's like in your face and dreaming and pushing forward. It's someone that's inspired by that one person that brings along other people according to their own giftings to contribute to that overall work. I don't remember where I heard the story, but like the Occupy Wall Street movement that happened when everything kind of crashed back in 2009 or 2010. There was a story of Ben & Jerry's, the company, coming in and saying, all right, let's move. Let's fund this. Let's get this organized and let's go from it. And they were like, no, if you organize it, then it moves away from the spirit of what we're trying to do there. And that's nice to say. But in reality, if you really want to make change, you need to create a space where all people can use the way that they view the world and their talents to contribute to that one big thing, whether they're a person who sees things on a certain level in black and white, like an accountant, or someone that like, here's the numbers, I can make this part run efficiently, and let those dreamers go out in the front lines and push the rhetoric and push the inspiration and the hope and all that kind of stuff. Is, I think we run our organizations and we run our movements based off of personality, and if that's all we have, then it fizzles out. But if we create space for everyone to be who they are, even if it's not what we imagine as, an activist, then we're shutting down our whole movement, not just people.
Yeah, it's really interesting you said that, because some of the movements lately, like Occupy Wall Street and like Black Lives Matter, have lacked a sort of cohesiveness and have splintered into different arenas and different groups, because not necessarily factions. I'm not trying to say that they're chaotic, but I mean that they've not been able to represent themselves in a cohesive way because they've resisted this idea that you're going to have figureheads and you're going to have charismatic leaders. They so don't want a milieu where there's only one or two spokespeople. They want that activist grassroots heart to stay in the center of the movement. But a lot of people will argue that because they've resisted having, for lack of a better term, a hierarchical structure, they've failed. These movements have failed or are failing. It's really interesting. So
and there are people that are built that way. They need that you're excluding people from your movement when you say that this is how it has to be, because there are people that like look at this podcast as a microcosm of that. We all come to this space in a different way, and we all have our different talents that have built it. Like Moni, you have that drive. Let's do this. Let's go for it. Let's put that out there, and then I tend to think in black and white terms, like here's this compartment, this needs to be organized, and this has to be put that, and all those things come together for something. Otherwise, it would fizzle away on both ends. If it was just me running it, it would be super boring and no one would listen. If it was another person leading it, then it would be like, oh, we'll have an episode next month, and then we'll figure it out from there. You know what I mean? Like there's that balance.
So you're saying overall, you're responding to her and saying that not everyone is a dreamer or the people who kind of like become the icon activist, that there's sometimes our role is not necessarily that. There's a bunch of different roles, right? That's what you're...
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. I think that it's interesting. You said the word, Mona, earlier, satiated. And I appreciate that. Like, there is a sense that being one of the smaller people or being one of the people who do things behind the scene, or just being comfortable with giving a little bit or serving a little bit that you do, your little corner of the world, can make you comfortable and satiated and not attuned to the big changes that need to happen. I think for me personally, that's not what happens. I think that
I agree for you in particular.
I think it's like the opposite, actually. I think having that allows me to pursue the bigger things. Maybe Martin Luther King Jr. was the same way in his life. Maybe he had this ministry where it was the smaller things, the kind of daily investments, the regular relationships, stuff like that, that allowed him to step up into a moment when he was called to speak and be a louder voice. I think it's the regular life, living in community, the kind of activism that's involved in that, which is like actually going into being a part of people's lives with each other and doing the small things that allows for the bigger changes to happen. It's a source of power, not a source of complacency, at least for me.
Yeah, no, I totally hear that. And I didn't mean to say complacency, but I think in general, like, what are we teaching people to strive for, as leaders? And
I heard you and agree with you for sure.
It can be a problem, but can also cause a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
So what I'm arguing is that, don't be comfortable with that. I think, I don't know. So I guess coming back to this idea of burnout and fatigue and fatalism, what can we say then? Like, given everything we've talked about, do we have a theology of burnout? Is it okay to step away for a while and that be a holy pursuit? I don't know. Where do we put that burnout? How do we recover? How do we... I hear you saying, Alan, that we need to find solace in the tiny differences that we're making and rejoice in those differences. I mean, there are times when I feel like those differences don't matter. Those things don't really make a difference, Like, how do... I don't even know what question I'm trying to ask, but I think you guys get it.
Maybe like you punt to just Buddhist truth and be like, I'm not going to be affected one way or the other, and learning detachment. Maybe that's the answer.
No, that's not the answer. I think.
Wait, no, I want to hear more about that.
I think it's important.
Jeff just shut you down. No.
He just shut down thousands of years of Eastern tradition. Okay, that's fine.
Well, you just maybe didn't communicate it well, but I'm going to say no to that.
Detachment, just like doing it because it's the right thing to do, and like not letting yourself get too emotional about it one way or the other.
Yeah, and not tying your identity to whether this happens or that happens. Like that's the concept of detachment itself, being not like the psychological thing, but the Buddhist practice of like not wrapping your fist too tightly around the thing, and like, or even Taoist, letting the river flow in front of you and being like a pool, not affected emotionally into the core of who you are by the evils in the world. And I think there's an element of truth to that, because when we are so affected that it kind of, it can really affect us and burn us out, and having the ability to detach like that is an important thing. But at the same time, like I feel like it's important to be a protester and stand up and raise your hands and get beaten up and like all those other things. And I think but there are Buddhists who do that. There are Buddhist monks who do protest. And so that's not like there's some sort of one or the other. So how
do you have a genuineness of spirit and intent and presence, but still be holding it loosely and not letting it affect your core identity?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's tough.
I think that there's truth to that. Despite my previous outcry of
no, there's
wrong.
not, Jeff. No.
He pulled a Trump. He was like, no, nope,
you're wrong.
China.
You're wrong.
Wrong.
You're wrong.
That's what it is. That's what the word is. Wrong.
Wrong.
Well, I think that on an emotional level, it's important. It's important for us to detach, but that doesn't like really solve the problem. What we're talking about is like we try to that's the point, is we're trying to detach, but we're feeling guilty, or that maybe will not just detach, but just give up and stay disconnected. And I think that goes to that idea of I think when we're passionate about any particular issue, it's easy for us to feel like our way is the right way. And I think that taking a rest, instead of seeing it as me stepping away or feeling guilty, it's creating a space for someone else to pick up the slack. And if we are talking about, especially in terms of justice, this community or this group of people having the rights that they have, all they have in certain times in their lives is their community, is the people that they attach to and they connect with, and that's their refuge. Whether they're a community that's oppressed for the color of their skin or whatever, when they're around people that are like-minded, then it connects them. And I think that we need to apply that same idea for people that are fighting for justice, is that we need to support each other. Hey, you're getting burnt out. This is too big. This is too big of an issue for us to not stop and to give up and be burnt out. Let me pick up the slack, take some rest, stop, and move forward, and know that we're not feeling guilty, and it's not about us individually, that we're a part of something. We're a part of community of love and justice, and we're not flying solo. We're not islands.
I'm flying solo. I'm flying solo. No, I think you're right. I just had to burst out into song for a moment. I think you're right. I think as we've been talking about all this, what keeps coming to mind is that it's the reason that things change in history is because people come together. It's no one doing it alone. It's always a mass, a critical mass of people doing good work. And
doing different work within that same greater work. And I think that's what we tend to forget, you know? And
we're an increasingly isolated population, you know, like there's so many studies that have come out about that lately, that people feel more and more isolated as much as we have more and more ways to connect. So I think it's just, it seems like it's the art of connecting despite all these forces that want to pull us apart.
You should bear a burden, but I think that when you're so individually minded, which in the West we are compared to how like 3/4 of the world think, which is much more community oriented, individuals like bear the brunt of all of the responsibility. It's like you have no responsibility and you're just not going to listen to it, or you take on too much, like the whole world's suffering. And then if you're not suffering with the world, then you somehow are not serving. And I think that elevates suffering to a level of somehow having power on its own. And it doesn't. Whether you suffer or not is not going to make the world a better place. It's completely ancillary to what you do, you know? Like
we do a crappy job of shared burdens, of sharing those burdens and not just putting them on one person or ourselves. Like, I mean, look at right now, here we are, election day, and we're putting our hopes on one person when ultimately, like, that person can really, the only power they have is to war, really, right? Like they're not going to change the economy. Most of the promises that they put out there aren't things that are dependent upon the decisions they make. They're dependent upon the decisions of the congressman or whoever's below them or whatever. Like it's just our drive. Like all of our attention is on the election and the office and the vote that goes towards probably the most meaningless in terms of what actually gets done.
Except I agree. It's nice to have someone to beat up on and blame for sure. Even though they're not responsible, but except for representing us to the rest of the world. I think that's the main thing that I think about, like representing us to ourselves. When the president speaks to the country, we see ourselves, you know, and when the president speaks to the rest of the world sees us. And so like that representational power is massive. But I do hear you. Like it's nice to be able to blame the president for everything.
Yeah, everything. Well, that's why I say in terms of things that that actually get done. And in regards to that, I don't know about you two, but I'm gonna miss having a president that's just smooth. That like you're just like that's the guy I want to represent me.
Pool. What was that SNL sketch where he was like singing and it's so smooth?
I don't.
I don't know. Sing Al Green. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm gonna miss him too.
I'm gonna miss that.
You know what? I liked Obama. I was in a context that really didn't like him. I thought he was a better choice. Like the first time he was elected, I think I was making that argument, even in the context that I was in. But I have to say, after all of this political craziness in the last year, there's been a couple times where I've watched him recently and been like, I like him. There's something about it. And like my little heart is beating a little bit faster, even though I think about all of the other problems that are going on. And all the problems with his, foreign policy that I don't appreciate. But still, there's something about that man that I definitely commiserate with.
Yeah, and he's a longtime activist too. I mean, talk about someone who's survived a lot of burnout and attacks and kept his cool. I mean, he's really kind of, for me, kind of an idol in that way.
Yeah.
Someone
well,
to emulate.
especially in terms of the burden that was immediately placed on him just because he's a black man. He not only had just the expectations of a normal president, but the expectations of the first black president. That is, I can't imagine. And I think,
and a failing economy at the same time.
Exactly. And I think that in terms of like the grace in which he handled it and the composure that he kept all throughout his presidency, despite whatever anyone may say about whether they're Republican, Democrat, or whatever, that has to be admired. That has to be.
Especially in light of what's happening.
The moral of the story is stay smooth, everyone, and you'll be just fine.
Hey,
that's right.
That's, again, Buddhist truth. There you go. Boom.
Flow with the river, the cosmic river.
All right, so let's wrap. Can we all agree that at least we have at the very least, a sliver more hope than we did at the beginning of this conversation?
This is important to end on a cathartic note. Dang
I think it is.
It's gonna happen.
Actually, yeah.
I resist that.
You guys didn't want to talk about this because you thought it would just end on fatalism.
No, because I knew I would want it to end on fatalism. I hate the movies that end on a happy note. It bothers me.
But Jeff prophesied that we shall turn this episode into a psalm that will end in praise. So
in the back of my head, I was like, no.
Well, we just spent a good couple minutes praising the president and how we were apprehensive, but then we're looking back and we're like,
I have hope. I'm gonna give myself a break. That's my end. That's my. We just mind melded, Alan.
We did. We both said I have hope. I was gonna say I have hope.
I have hope in change.
God. I have.
Well, that's more appropriate.
Yeah. I have hope. I have hope in love. Love will prevail. That's my word for God. Right. I really do. I think that if we remember love, we really can't go wrong. Like really deeply, truly rooted, exuberant, genuine, like soulful love. That keeps us, if we stay rooted in that, I think all of our efforts to make the world better, like, I think people can tell. I think people can tell when you're doing the right thing because you have to, because it's your duty, versus because you deeply want to love. And it goes back to, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, if I give all I have to the poor and surrender my body to the flames.
She's preaching.
Then if I have not love, I am preaching. Dang it.
That's good.
If I have not love, then I have nothing. I gain nothing. Nothing happens in the world.
That's right.
So for me, I think this whole episode has been a reminder. Oh yeah, I'm rooted in something so powerful that evil cannot overcome it. Amen.
Amen. I threw away the line earlier, but similarly, I do believe anything done in love, any action that is resulting in or powered by love is contributing to something forever. And in essence is eternal. Like that never goes away. You can talk about reward or whatever if you want to use the language of economics, like you're rewarded for the good you do. I think it's more like, even if 20 years down the road, we kill each other in a giant atomic nuclear like event and humanity's done, for the rest of the history of the galaxy, the things that were done in love by people on this planet participated in God, and God will always be around. And so I think that there's a real preservation there, and we can talk some other day about like afterlife or heaven or whatever, but just the concept that whenever I participate in God, that's never lost gives me hope.
Beautiful. Love it.
Agreed. Good stuff. All right. Well, let us know what you think. Hopefully you have been inspired a little bit, and you can add your voice to this particular conversation by going to the show notes at irenicast.com/88. And there you'll find relevant links and a complete list of all the other ways you can contact us. That's irenicast.com/88.
And at the very least, you are not the only one who is burned out.
Nope. You got 3 compatriots right here.
Compadres.
That's right. On the other side of the music, we will be doing our biblical elections. Since today, as of posting, November 8th, 2016 is Election Day. Many of you are maybe hopefully listening to this podcast in line because so many people are going out to vote that you have to wait in line. And we are providing you thoughtful conversation and entertaining rhetoric with this segment that we're going to call Biblical Elections. And how this is going to work.
I just want to thank you ahead of time that you're voting for either Jill or Bernie. Good job. I can't say that from the pulpit, but I can say from here.
Bernie's on the ballot there.
They can write it in.
They could write it in.
I have delusional friends who thinks he's still going to win. And
really?
Yeah.
How?
I want to be there with
how
them.
democracy works?
Do any of us, Mona? Does anyone?
I understand all of it all the
That's
time.
a good question. All right. So how this segment is going to work is that each of us have picked or chosen two characters or personalities or people from Scripture, and we are going to pit them against each other in an election. And then all three of us must discuss what the good and the bad of each candidate is, and then we will vote here and now to find out which of those two biblical personalities will become the president of Irenicast. But no Jesus. That doesn't count.
Actually, I was going to pick I was going to do Jesus or the Christ and make a fine theological nuance joke there.
No, don't start your.
That's a
don't,
joke.
don't do that.
Don't do that.
That's not.
What about James or John, the sons of Zebedee?
Alan, what's your?
It's supposed to be a
one?
joke. You know how they both wanted to be the leader. No, never mind.
Oh my goodness.
Jesus castigates
I
them.
swear, Alan.
I'm finding it funny how clever that you find this conversation.
Fine, I'll give you my real one. Saul versus Saul. There you go.
Are you saying Saul versus Paul?
Yeah.
Are you going
Saul.
there? Are you going
no?
with
King Saul versus Saul of Tarsus. Yeah,
But that's Saul versus Paul.
Yes, King Saul versus Saul. No, not post Enlightenment. I say Enlightenment because you know how he's blinded by the light.
Oh my
Never
gosh.
mind.
No more biblical
not
puns.
Paul, but Saul.
Oh, King Saul is much more ruthless. I definitely have to go for King Saul. Wait, what are
You
the
would vote for
criteria
King Saul?
here, though? This is what I need to know.
The criteria is to make Israel great again.
Oh goodness.
Can we build a big wall? Oh my goodness.
Which one would you vote for, Jeff?
I'm gonna go with Paul, pre-Christian Paul. I have an affinity for the grassroots candidate, passionate about what he believes, and I'm going with Saul, New Testament Saul.
Very nice.
All right, so Alan, you're
Very
the
nice.
tiebreak. Who are you going to vote for in your own proposed election?
You know, now that you both just made the case for those, I think I'm going to go with the grassroots campaigner.
So does that mean he's going to convert to Christianity and have his conversion halfway through his presidency? And is that going to change anything for you?
Oh my God.
Mona, what about you?
Would you rather vote for Ruth or Esther?
Ooh, actually, I was about to do a knee-jerk reaction to Ruth.
Why?
But I
Because
don't
she's
know
like
now.
the plain Jane or something?
No, she's a foreigner.
It's true. Is she even eligible to run? I want to see her birth certificate right now. I want to see it.
Show me your birth certificate.
But your people
That's not
are
how
her
things
people.
work.
That's our campaign slogan.
I'm going to go with Esther because I want someone who can manipulate foreign leaders. And she's basically a bachelorette contestant. And who doesn't want a bachelorette contestant as your national leader? We're voting for The Apprentice. But you'd rather vote for a Moabitess who just does what she's told? I don't think so.
Yeah, you know what? I'd probably go with Esther too. Nothing against her.
Yo, that
She's
Ruth
just
is
not-
a loser.
She doesn't represent my Israel. That's what I'm saying.
She's low energy.
She's not. What is she not flashy
She's
enough
really
for
low
you?
energy. That was my favorite. That seriously is my favorite Trumpism right there. Low energy. Just saying that about someone. That's seriously funny
Why?
to me. Because it's ridiculous. It's like, hey, this person shouldn't be president. He's low energy. Like, what the hell?
Don't you want
does that
someone
have
who's
to
low
do with
energy when there's like a
anything?
nuclear attack and isn't going to spaz out on you? I mean, personally,
I'm hoping that after today, that this is the last we ever have to talk or hear about anything concerning that particular candidate.
Good Lord, please. I know.
All right. So my election is between Jonah and Judas.
Oh my God. What?
I think I thought about like the same exact
Jonah
thing,
comes
dude.
around at the end.
No, mine. I was gonna say Cain or Judas. That's what it was. Jonah or Judas. That's a hard one.
Right? Because Judas would be
really
fiscally
good with
responsible.
economy. Yeah.
Exactly. Jonah is just a dirty draft dodger, right? I mean, that's essentially what he is.
Yeah. I feel
He
like
ran
Judas
away from
would-
service to
would
God.
create jobs.
Yeah, but he's got a heart of gold at the end of the day, and he got it done. He got it done what he needed to do.
Well, he may have
I'm gonna
run,
go with
but
Jonah.
he ran because he didn't want the foreigners to win or have any grace. So that's a plus for some people, right?
I suppose so. Yeah, he was trying to do it out of justice. Like, those people don't deserve my help. So
That's right.
I contend that he's a good guy. He didn't deserve to have his skin chewed off by stomach acid.
I'm
Like
gonna
a
go.
whale,
I'm gonna go with
you know,
Judas.
Whatever happened to him?
I'm gonna go with Judas.
You're gonna go-
Jonah.
You're such a Judas.
Jonah was an unwilling instrument of God. Judas like pushed the story along on purpose. He had high energy. He like knew what he was doing, you know? And he like I said, he'd be good for the economy. He was good at handling money. And didn't he handle the money for the apostles, like for real?
Yeah, he did.
It's not an
Yeah.
apocryphal
Well,
story, right?
And Judas just sat around waiting to die. I mean, Jonah just sat around waiting to die. At
He
least
did.
Judas took manners into his own hands and decided.
right.
I'm going
I
with
can't believe I'm even hearing this right now. I don't understand what's happening.
He's gonna make Israel
What do you-
great again. He's gonna bring the jobs back. That's what he's gonna do.
You know, I've
Yeah.
convinced myself. I'm going with Judas as well. I think he's gonna win in a landslide.
He's gonna get a lot of the. He's gonna get rid of the bad people that need to be. Wow, that's really bad.
That's true.
I'm not gonna go there.
What is happening
gonna-
here? He got rid of Jesus. You guys are
Jesus was
anti-Jesus
upsetting.
now.
Jesus was upsetting the empire. Okay, Jesus was upsetting the empire, making fun of Pontius Pilate, bringing people in on Palm Sunday, getting everybody all angry and stoked up, especially the bad people, the low energy people.
Okay,
people
so
who
you're
were poor.
against rabble rousing prophets
Right.
who just might be
Absolutely.
the son of God.
Yeah, who just
Okay.
want to like spit on hundreds of years of Greco-Roman society and just do their own thing. No,
Yeah, it's true.
No. To let in foreigners and poor people. Heck
And
no.
Judas
will make
is
it
like
right.
Cyrus. He's
What is
being
happening?
used by
You guys
God.
are just doing this now because it's bothering me. This is what
I think
is
we're
happening.
subconsciously letting out all of our frustration on Trump through biblical archetypes that we can just
You're saying we
feel
need a
disconnected
Judas
from it.
who is like a necessary evil to stop the
That's
evil.
right. Judas knows what real evil is, therefore he can save us
That's
from
right.
it.
and Judas
Right.
has already done it.
That makes no sense.
His evil
That's actually Trump's
It doesn't
entire
make
campaign.
sense.
his evil brought in the greatest salvation the world has ever known. Through his act of evil, he made the world great again. And I'm casting my vote.
I can't even with this conversation. I like my trust is diminishing in both of you.
This is what happens when you have a male majority.
Yeah, apparently.
During the debate, I kept saying over and over, what Trump is proposing is just the deal with the devil scenario. It's like classic literature. He literally said, I haven't paid taxes in, almost 20 years. I'm the worst part of American economics and the mixture between politics and money. He's like, so I know how bad it is, and I'm the only one that can save you from it. He's like, I am the evil that I can save you from. I know how I'm the devil, and you're gonna make a deal with me, and we're gonna make it great again. That's basically
right.
his entire.
I
campaign.
don't want to talk. I know, but I don't want to talk about that guy anymore. He makes me crazy, and I just
Today's the
don't.
last
I just
day
want
you
him to
have
go
to.
away. I just want.
I
him
think
to go
that's
away.
definitely going to do it for us this week. In fact, we went into this segment saying that we wanted to do a different segment because we didn't want to talk about Trump. And what did we end up doing?
Yeah, Alan.
It just
I
shows
can't
that
help
we are suffering from some kind of traumatic stress because of. Anyway,
Yes.
it's hopefully it's over after today,
Must
and
be.
we will be done with it. But if not, we are at least done with this episode. Thank you for joining us this week.
If not, don't come after us, Trump. Okay, we'll find a way to like you if you're the president, I suppose.
sue me,
or we'll move to
please.
Canada.
We'll just take the podcast underground.
Underground, isn't it already underground?
No.
I'm pretty sure it is.
That would be cool if it was. All right. Anyway, if you enjoy what you hear and you want to support Irenicast, you can go to irenicast.com/support for all the ways in which to do that. And so for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation, and go vote.